everybody. I'm with Jim Poesl. He is an expert on safety. He hosts a podcast called Safety Wars. He's got a company that deals with safety. He's been involved in a lot of environmental disaster cleanups. Truly an expert in his field. Jim, thank you for being with us. Now, you have been reviewing the data that's coming out of this train derailment in Ohio. There's, I guess, a number of different schools of thought. Some people are saying this is a catastrophe, don't go back home, we're all doomed. Others, just like the government, are saying no big deal, everything's fine. Where do you fall in this?
Well, you have to start out with what is safe. What is safety, right? The traditional view of safety has always been zero accidents, zero illnesses, zero injuries. But as we know, with that type of definition, and the minute that you have a blip anywhere, now everything is unsafe. And that's how it's communicated. So what we try to do is talk about safety as a bunch of safeguards that you have in place, capacity in a system, resilience, things of that nature. And the more capacity you build into a system, the more resilience. You'll still have injuries, but you'll have, or accidents or anything else, but you'll have backups to that. You'll have ways of managing that. And I think that's where this comes into with this. Is it safe to go back? Hard to say, because this is one of the issues with chemical hazards, especially when you're dealing with public health or with whether homes, et cetera, are clean or not, is that there's really no standards for that. So for example, if you're dealing with lead contamination, specifically with lead-based paint issues, we have standards for what's supposed to be clean inside a house. You don't have that with other chemicals.
Like vinyl chloride.
Like vinyl chloride, the big one. As far as how they handled things, it's not that they made a good choice or a bad choice. They didn't have any good choices to begin with this. So they made a decision to do a burn-off. As of right now, nobody was killed in the disaster. I can tell you with the hazards of vinyl chloride and the chemical hazards, as well as logistics of doing that type of a cleanup, you're going to put first responders and second responders' lives in jeopardy. I hate to second guess anybody in the field, but I'm hard pressed to say that I would have acted any differently. I probably would have been doing a controlled burn. Where I see this whole thing going is that assigning blame, really not useful. Who's liable for it? Railroad company, obviously. I think they've acknowledged that as well. But they need to do a good, thorough investigation, which came out yesterday, that they're looking at the bearings on one of the axles of the train and everything else built into that, and that's being the cause of the accident, at least the immediate cause. But there's been talk on inspections, how we actually define a derailment. We know that derailments are underreported in this country because of the way that they're defined, and you're looking at 1,000 to 1,500 derailments that are reported every year. So of different types, different what's the word I'm looking for different scales, things of that nature. So those are my brief thoughts on that. So
on this subject of blame, you've got a lot of blame games going on. You've got the Biden administration suggesting that the Trump administration is to blame because they supported deregulation. You've got Trump kind of throwing barbs because the Biden administration didn't come. Pete Buttigieg is out wondering why there's so many white people at construction sites rather than dealing with this train hazard. Do you think the federal government has any responsibility in this at all?
Well, I think there's a huge misunderstanding on the role of the federal government as things are set up under the Stafford Act and some of the other laws in there, where the local government is always in charge of a disaster. The federal government is always there as an advisory role, unless you're dealing with the scope of a disaster so huge, and across state lines and everything else, like this has been with the plume going down the rivers. That's when the federal government normally steps in as a more of an advisory role. That being said, I think the state of Ohio has done a phenomenal job in managing this based on the information I have with this. The federal government could be out there, I think, more of a leadership role as far as technical data, keeping people calm. Obviously, they're in charge of, through the NTSB and probably a couple of other agencies, they're going to be in charge of doing the investigation and everything else. That's their role on that. But the important thing is to do a thorough investigation, don't worry so much about blame. That's at this point, that's later on. And it's not even really useful if you're going to make a good, safe, good policy, right? So we've all heard of garbage in, garbage out. Yeah. Well, this is the whole thing, a knee-jerk reaction with legislation and everybody screaming and yelling, including the head of the US EPA, Mike Regan, right, where we're going to hold them accountable, blah, 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 blah. Really not useful in protecting the public on this one. Other disasters, maybe. This one, not so much, in my opinion.
So if you were a resident of East Palestine and the government said you could go back, which is what they've said, that it's safe to go home, would you take their advice? Would you be at home right now if your home was there?
If anybody doesn't, we've given a lot of information here, but there are 4 basic questions that you need to ask. Any type of disaster dealing with either air pollution, water, right, what have you, drinking water, what have you, and that is this. Number 1, is it safe? Right. Number 2, what are the chemicals we're dealing with? In this case, vinyl chloride. Number 3, what are you basing what's safe as? Because a lot of the standards out there are not out there, like I said, like with lead indoor standards or anything else. The 4th one that they always seem to fail on, but they did not fail this time, is did you actually sample? What kind of data are you generating? They've generated a lot of data. So it's kind of hard to say what's safe, what's not safe, because there are very few standards here. What I would go for in that case, if I was managing the cleanup, would be a 0 tolerance, would be 0. So we would be sampling the houses and everything else with that. Where I see this happening long-term based on other similar situations is the railway, in all likelihood, buying the houses, relieving that liability, and managing the cleanup the best they can with this. That's where I see this going. Because I tell you what, no one's ever going to be satisfied with, is it clean or is it not clean? And since cancer is one of our main concerns in this society, any type of cancer case that would be related to any property ownership there would be litigated. So I think the best thing the railroad could do is probably just buy all the impacted properties.
So what about going back to you and your family? If you and your family lived in East Palestine, would you be at home right now? I
own about $10,000 in environmental sampling equipment. I would check out the house first. All right, if it were me.
Yeah. Excellent. So where can people find your podcast and the rest of your work?
My website is safetywars.com. We are Safety Wars. We're broadcasting live, usually 4 or 5 nights a week on safetyfm.com at 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. Or you can find us on your favorite podcast network under Safety Wars.
Excellent. Jim, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Sophia paused before the door. It read, Department of Bidigital Convergence. Just inside was a new world, a better world, the one of everlasting life, of no pain, of no loss, of no problem. She entered the chamber and her surroundings changed. She saw around her an infinite field of waving golden grain surmounted by cloudless blue sky. The AI voice whispered gently in her mind, Welcome to the singularity. She couldn't see it and couldn't feel it, but her body had almost instantly been covered by a swarm of tiny gray multi-legged bots that melted through her clothes and into her skin. Not perceiving the nightmare, her eyes had already been consumed and the rest of her body was dissolving as the bots digested her flesh. She felt only a warmth suffusing her being. Drowsy, she drifted to sleep, and her last thought was one of panic. Would she ever wake? Could a nightmare vision like this be an outcome of the much-hyped transhumanist technological singularity? Enter the world of the future as illuminated by the experience of the past in Endgame, the new book by Dennis Barrett, the publisher of the New American Magazine, and find out how the disastrous COVID pandemic response fits with the technocratic elite's thirst to create a transhumanist utopia. Get Endgame from shopjbs.org with free shipping with code ENDSHIP, ENDSHIP. Or get Endgame and the Great Reset Collector's issue of the New American Magazine and get free shipping plus an additional 20% off both with code END20, END20.